Okay, so as noted, I was going to start with some medical stuff. I inherited some crappy genes from my father. He was a type 2 diabetic. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, they tested me. They did a oral glucose tolerance test, and I tested what at that time was considered like borderline. Now, the standards have changed a great deal since then. I would have been treated if I had tested that today. But I didn't have to do anything except try to eat well, and I had my daughter. But the fact that I was borderline did end up a bit significant. Just 6 years later, I was diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. And at that time, there weren't any such thing as blood glucose meters that patients could own, only doctors had them. So what I had to do was try to figure it out from the research. And I happened to be a biochemist working on my PhD at the time, so I had a research library, and I went and looked it up and basically figured out that low carb was the thing for a type 2 diabetic to do. Later, when I did have a blood glucose meter, I determined that if I ate 50 grams of net carb per day, that was low enough carb to keep my blood glucose normal. So that worked for most of 2 decades. And then it didn't work anymore because when I was 44, I had really bad stomach pain. And I called my daughter to take me to the emergency room. In the hospital, they tested my blood sugar at over 300. And I was only in the hospital for a couple of days. I had acute pancreatitis, which just means that your pancreas is inflamed, which hurts pretty bad. So I was only in a couple of days and I went home. But then my blood sugar would never go below 300 for a year. It didn't go below 300. I did low carb and I did no carb, just basically eating what back then we called meat and eggs. The meat and eggs diet, called carnivore today, but back then it was meat and eggs. And I even fasted, but only for one day. And my blood sugar would not go down. And I should have done something about this. My excuse was we didn't have insurance, so I couldn't go to a doctor. But the reality was I was procrastinating because I knew if I went to a doctor with blood sugar that bad, as restrictive as I was eating, that I was going to be put on insulin. And I was very scared to be put on insulin. So after a year of having very high blood sugar and being a wuss about doing anything about it, I had a big old heart attack. And they tried to treat me in the cath lab with a stent, but they were unable to reach. So they were going to do a surgery, a bypass. But my blood sugar was too high for it to be safe to do surgery. So they put me on both basal and bolus insulin. Basal insulin, because the word's like from the word base, is the insulin you need all the time when you're not eating. It's like for fasting. And bolus insulin is the insulin you take to cover a meal. So the idea was I took some basal insulin once a day to just keep me at an even keel, and then took more for my meals. This is, by the way, how normal people work. You always have some insulin working in your body, and then when you eat, your body makes more. So they were basically trying to aim the same thing at my eating so that they got my blood sugar down enough for the surgery. And I had what's called a CABG, which is a coronary artery bypass graft. And the surgeon told me ahead of time that it would take me about 6 months to recover. That was standard. You'll be back to work in 6 months, no problem. That's not exactly what happened. After about a year of the surgery, I could still barely get out of bed and was on pain meds. And I had ridiculous fatigue. And they tested me for everything you could think of: B12, iron, Lyme's disease, Epstein-Barr virus. And after I passed all of these tests, what ended up happening was I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, chronic fatigue syndrome basically means we tested you for everything else and we can't figure out why you're screwed up. It's what they call a diagnosis of exclusion. You get it because you don't have anything else. I did find a few things that helped. When I had my cortisol tested, I found out that I was making almost none. I had pretty severe adrenal insufficiency. And when I started on hydrocortisone, I was able to get out of bed like every day. So that was a big advantage. I later found out I also had some thyroid issues, and it took 2 or 3 months on thyroid meds to straighten those out. And at that point, well, the big benefit was I could do more than just shower every day. I had some functionality, but not very much. As this disability went on, I started having problems with my feet swelling, and it was really, really pretty bad. My feet and my legs, they were literally deformed. I ended up having to get off bolus insulin because I discovered if I took a shot of the bolus, which is the fast-acting insulin, then what happened was that my feet blew up and it took 2 or 3 days to go back down. So since we couldn't control my blood sugar with insulin, I was put on what's known as Sglt2 inhibitor. I'll get back to that in a minute. I just want to, this is not my leg. I don't have any pictures of my leg because if someone had tried to take a picture of my leg, I'd have smacked him upside the head. Nobody's taking pictures of that. But like they would swell to the degree that I couldn't even stand, let alone walk. So I was like, I don't care about my blood sugar. Hello. That's why I was off the insulin for a while. So Sglt2 inhibitors are a class of drugs that what they do is they make you pee out a lot of sugar. And so that lowers your blood sugar. They basically affect the kidneys and make that happen. So I was on one first called Invokana because my endo had like free samples she gave me for a month, but then I switched to a different one and it did lower my blood sugar. I wasn't like in good control or anything, but it was better than not being on it until I got really, really sick and I was in an emergency room and the doctor told me I had diabetic ketoacidosis. And I said, no, I don't. I'm a type 2. We don't get DKA. That's a type 1 thing. And he told me that after the research I had read before going on this drug, they had discovered it caused diabetic ketoacidosis in type 2 diabetics. And there was now a black box warning. And I was in an ICU for several days. I had 8 different bags of electrolytes dripping into my veins. So if you ever wonder why I talk about electrolytes so much, not having them nearly killed me at one point. Meanwhile, my legs were all swollen from the lymphedema and they got infected and I had pretty bad cellulitis. Well, I was kind of trapped in the hospital because, okay, the primary doctor said I couldn't go out until the endo said I could go and the infectious disease specialist said I could go. Well, the endo was giving me insulin and therefore making my legs blow up. And my legs were getting more and more infected. So like I was trapped. I was never going to get out of this hospital. So this is the first time I really seriously put my foot down about hospitalization and just said, I'm going home. They made me sign a whole bunch of papers that basically said, I agree, I might drop dead at any moment if I leave the hospital. And I'm like, yeah, fine. I could die here too. And if I die, I'm going to die someplace where I'm allowed to take a shower without permission and I have kitties. So never mind, I'm leaving. Not that I wasn't an ornery patient before that, but my stubbornness went up a degree at that point. Also, shortly after that, my daughter got very sick with diverticulitis, and there were multiple trips to Texas to help take care of her. And she was in and out of the hospital a number of times, and finally had a surgery and was recovered for several months when she died very suddenly of an aortic aneurysm. The main reason this is relevant to my medical history is because there was a year there, I didn't take any insulin. I didn't take any of my meds. I didn't go to doctor appointments. I was eating complete crap like ramen and spaghetti and just, bread and whatever. I've seen people in the Like a Bear group who have stuck to what they were doing, even in the midst of grief. I did not do that. I was completely off the rails. But I did get my shit together eventually, and I started eating right and taking care of myself again, using my Lymphopress to keep my legs from swelling too much. If I used the Lymphopress, I could handle the insulin. I could keep my blood sugar down. And one day, this very strange thing happened. I woke up in a hospital in Baltimore. I don't live in Baltimore. I live in Pennsylvania, and I had no idea how I'd gotten to Baltimore. What had happened was at home, I'd been acting more and more strange and irrational, and like falling down and not able to get up. And eventually Steve called an ambulance. And when he called an ambulance, they took me to Carlisle Hospital here nearby. And Carlisle Hospital thought I had a boil and they would fix it, except they realized it was very deep, like scary deep. So a helicopter took me to Baltimore, where one of the primary wound centers in the world is. And I had 3 surgeries for necrotizing fasciitis, in which they cut off a whole bunch of the upper part of my right leg. So when I woke up in the bed, I couldn't move. I had no idea what was going on. I had no memory for 6 weeks. I'd not been unconscious. They say I'm told like I fought when I was intubated, when they put a feeding tube in, didn't like it. But I just woke up and came to and had no memory of 6 weeks, and discovered I couldn't even like shift in the bed. Like if I slid over, I needed someone to help me up. I had no ability to move. And the chunk of my leg that had been removed, Steve tells me, because it was right up near the crotch, top of the thigh, I couldn't see the wound. He tells me it was big as a sheet of paper and as deep as a ream. It went most of the way around my legs. Because they, in the surgery, removed all the lymph nodes, 3 of my toes went black. And because obviously the lymphedema is way worse without lymph nodes in that leg. And they did an angio and put in 3 stents in my leg. Also, during this exact same hospitalization, I had a pulmonary embolism because there wasn't enough wrong with me, apparently. After the stay in the hospital, I ended up in a rehab, and the rehab was because I had to learn things like how to stand up and how to walk over again, at least well enough to go home. The rehab was in a nursing home. Like it had a wing that was rehab and a wing that was nursing home. And one of the primary lesson I took from being in rehab was that I never, ever wanted to be in a nursing home. The 6 weeks I was there, I was miserable. I would go out in my wheelchair, and it was right near an interstate exit, and try to imagine the timing that I could put my wheelchair in front of a truck coming off the highway. I didn't get the timing worked out, luckily, but I was absolutely certain under no circumstances was I ever going to be in a nursing home. It took about a year of healing, and it didn't totally heal, so I ended up having to get a skin graft. And then I had some problems with my rotator cuff, which wasn't a big deal and really has nothing to do with diabetes per se. And then I woke up one day and I couldn't breathe. And I called 911, and they originally thought that I had COPD when I was in the hospital, but I didn't. It turned out what I had was congestive heart failure. And what that means, not in every case, but certainly in mine, was that there was so much fluid in my chest that it was compressing my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in my own fluids. So it wasn't just my legs and feet anymore. It was my chest. If I had noticed, I had to keep buying larger bras, but see, I just thought it was getting fatter. I didn't realize it was fluid. So I was in the hospital for a couple of days then and on IV diuretics, but I did leave early. And again, because now I'd already learned I could leave a hospital anytime I wanted to, I had learned that lesson. So I left and I was home, and I was sleeping at this desk I'm at right now in this chair because I couldn't lie down and breathe simultaneously. And the very next summer, a year later, I had a very bad case of congestive heart failure again. And that time I was just like, I'm not going to the hospital. I was pretty sure I was dying. I could barely stay awake 2 or 3 hours at a time. And I had terrific brain fog. I couldn't think rationally when I was awake. But I'd already decided I wasn't going to the hospital. And I just took a whole lot of the diuretic at home to try to fix it. Probably would have been faster to go to the hospital. But what also happened during this time is that my home health aide wasn't enough help anymore. I wouldn't necessarily be awake when she was there. She'd follow the list of instructions I'd left, and she'd cook something and she'd put it in the fridge, and I'd wake up and she wouldn't be there, and I couldn't reach it to get it out and microwave it. And I started realizing that I was going to need 24/7 care, and Yeah, no, that was not happening. I was not going to go to a nursing home. So that was in June of 2019. And I was sleeping upright in pain, expecting and hoping for death because if I did go to a nursing home, they might keep me alive for years, like a plant being watered. And that was just not something I wanted for myself. And I do not criticize anyone who does choose that. It's just wasn't okay for me. What's okay for everybody varies, and it wasn't okay for me. The next month, I had lost just enough fluid that I could lie down. My legs were still very, very swollen, and I was taking a lot of potassium, and I started lymphopressing. You can't lymphopress when you have congestive heart failure because that pushes the fluid up from your legs. And if you can't breathe, look, having your legs swollen is way less of a problem. But in July, I was able to start lymphopressing and getting my feet to go down. I still wasn't getting up much or doing much. How do I explain this? If my cup of coffee was empty, which it never is unless I'm asleep, I would wait until I had to get up to pee anyway. Even if it was 2 or 3 hours, I might sit with no drink. And then I would do everything I needed to do in a 10-minute walk around and then sit back down. So I was doing something else with YouTube playing. I don't know what, probably playing a game on my computer or something. And as it happened, YouTube's algorithm decided I needed to know about Dr. Jason Fung. He has quite an active channel now, but at that time, there were only a few videos from him, and most of them were him doing presentations at scientific conferences. So I was extremely skeptical because he was talking about reversing diabetes, and that sounded suspiciously like curing diabetes. And I knew that wasn't true. And then he said something that kind of hit me hard, that insulin causes insulin resistance. And this made so much sense. That's how people have to take more and more drugs because the drug they're taking, they become resistant to. And I'm taking insulin, besides the fact I already make more than a normal person because I'm a type 2 diabetic. But I'm looking at my belly thinking, why am I shooting this stuff into my belly multiple times a day? This is not making me better. It's making me have more insulin resistance. So I kept listening. And one of the studies that he presented was that 2 weeks of fasting could reduce 80% of liver fat, which is extraordinarily common amongst diabetics. Most of us have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And if the fat around the liver is the main organ involved at the beginning of insulin resistance, if you lose the fat around it, that's going to mean that it can work better, and therefore your insulin resistance is going to go down. And then he showed another study that showed that the pancreatic fat was reduced also, which means the beta cells, the ones that make insulin, can work better. Those two things, if I can make insulin in response to need and my body is no longer insulin resistant, doesn't that mean I could reverse diabetes? Maybe this guy wasn't so crazy. And he sounded suspiciously like my friend Amanda Rose. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to explain to you who Amanda Rose is. After my first bout of congestive heart failure, I used to work for her. I helped her on a page she ran called Fresh Bites Daily. And I told her when I was in the hospital that I, was obviously not working. And when I got home and I'm sleeping in a chair and can't lay down, she tells me that she lost 100 pounds in 8 months. Honestly, I was like, who cares? I mean, I didn't say that, but I was like, I can't breathe. Whatever. But she was happy and I was happy for her. I mean, that's great. I mean, I'm glad you're happy. And as she explained to me what she had done, I argued with her about why this wouldn't work for diabetics because I had done low carb. I had done low carb for almost 2 decades. I never lost weight. I was in all sorts of low carb groups. I did it. And I would say I did it just to control my blood glucose because that's all I ever got out of it. But I was full of explanations about why keto did not fix diabetes because I had experience that it didn't. And when she explained to me about the whole fasting business, that she was eating 1 meal a day and sometimes not that, sometimes doing longer fasts. Honestly, I thought this sounded rather like an eating disorder and that maybe she was like losing her mind, but she was happy. So, you can't bother someone when they're happy. I didn't really talk to her hardly at all for over a year because I thought, well, she's happy, but I don't approve, basically. And I'm not going to run around telling someone I don't approve. Nobody wants to hear that. Meanwhile, while I was running around not talking to her much, certain that keto didn't fix diabetes, she had started a little group called Eat Like a Bear, and largely with a video that went viral called Postcard from Yellowstone. And this picture is from that video. This is her 1 year apart, what she had done. A picture of her with her son. If you haven't seen that video, after I'm done with this live, I will attach the links to this. I didn't figure that out in advance, unfortunately. It was on my to-do list, but... So, since Dr. Fung had talked me into fasting and giving that a try, I joined Eat Like a Bear. And August 2nd, 2019, I both started my first fast and made my first post to Eat Like a Bear. And, didn't know how well this was going to work. It was an experiment, but I was desperate, so it was a chance. Within a couple days, my legs shrank and I could feel below my knees. And I actually sat at my desk, reaching down both of the legs to see how far down I could, like every day for several days. And because the one leg had the lymph nodes removed, it was always more swollen. And one day I could feel all the way down to the toes of even my bad leg. And I decided I was going to try to walk without my cane. In physical therapy, I'd gotten to the point I could walk with a walker and then with the rollator. And then on perfectly flat surfaces, I could walk a little bit if there weren't curbs that were too high, but only a few steps. Like I used a motorized cart in a grocery. But I thought if I can feel my feet, maybe I can walk without a cane. And I went out in my yard and this was literally within a week of starting that I could walk. In under 2 months, I took my last shot of insulin. I only took insulin when my blood sugar got over 200 and it stopped doing that. And less than a year, I was fired by my endo. That's what I said. I said, "What, are you firing me?" And she said, No, you graduated. Because by that point, I not only didn't have diabetes anymore, I had also weaned off the meds that were replacing cortisol, and my adrenals were making cortisol fine. And I'd weaned off the thyroid meds. And what she said was, "You don't have any endocrine diseases." And I'm like, okay. And she pointed at the patient portal and said to me, "Look at the picture of you from when you started here. You don't look like the same person." So it was wildly successful. And this is a video that maybe I should speed up. This took almost a year to make, even though I was walking that first week. Basically because I'm scared of cameras, which I know sounds really ironic as I'm doing a live video. Believe me, I am very nervous right now. I've been hiding from cameras for years. The vast majority of pictures of me over the last couple of decades are of me asleep with cats because Steve thought I was cute, cuddled with kitties, and I wasn't awake to yell at him to get that damn thing away from me. I was a long time before I posted any before and after pictures in the group. And so this was around 11 months in. Denise and I went to Colonel Denning, which was one of the common places we hiked. And she took a bunch of pictures of me walking. And it has really cool sound, but I turned the sound off because it was too loud and I hadn't figured out how to adjust it yet. So it's very motivating to me still because of where I'd been and what I'd come from. And that, I mean, in under a year, we were making this video where I was definitely not 300 pounds anymore, not diabetic. It was pretty awesome. But the whole point of this was, how did I start? And obviously I succeeded brilliantly and I'm really, really happy with the results. But basically, when I started watching Dr. Fung's videos, I started eating very keto-ish for a while. And I was devouring both his and Amanda's content. I watched all their videos. I bought his book, The Diabetes Code, and read it like 2 or 3 times in a couple weeks. And I had decided I was going to start fasting August 1st. And August 1st, I panicked that I was not going to be able to eat carbs. Who knows how long? At that time, I didn't realize I would choose to not do it anymore, but I didn't know when. So I decided I'll start August 2nd so I can eat carbs until midnight. And that is literally what I did. I ate some Polish sausage and a whole package of Knorr noodles, what's supposed to be 2 or 4 servings or something, just before midnight. So when I started my first fast, I was definitely not in ketosis. But that's what people will ask. How, because they'll say that you should get in ketosis first. You should cut out sugar, do things gradually. No, I was not in ketosis, and I started an extended fast that went on pretty darn long. And how did I manage to do that? I made this meme to answer that question way back then. I was extraordinarily desperate. My thinking was, if I die, I'll never get to eat again. If I go to a nursing home, there'll never be anything I want to eat again. So let's try this not eating thing for a little while, because I have nothing to lose. That was the majority of my motivation. A minority of it was that I am an extraordinarily stubborn individual when I choose to be. And I have used that as a superpower on this journey, basically being very stubborn about what I've chosen to do and considering temptations or invitations or whatever else out there in the world that suggests I should do something else, being very stubborn against it, just like I was very stubborn about leaving the hospital. So that was pretty much why I did that. But you may be wondering, what if you're not as desperate as I was? I will just say right now, I do hope nobody watching this is as desperate as I was. I would not wish that on anyone. Well, maybe 1 or 2 people. I hope you're not. And so you might be wondering, how can you start? Because that's the big question we get all the time. How do I start? How do I start? So that's what I'm going to talk about next week. How do you start?